The Eatery is a fictional restaurant that currently is saving all of their information on paper. They do things like write out purchase tickets, they write out receipts, they write out orders, they even write out things like what the customer is ordering. What they would like to do is they would like to automate it so that they can have everything in a database and then they can pull any information from there that they want. So what you'll see here is we already have our survey form. What we've done is we've asked the users some information about what they need out of a database. This is an extremely simplified version of how to create a database. In this case, we have somebody like the manager. The manager needs to be able to report profits, losses for the company. He or she needs to schedule shifts for the employees and also needs to be able to order inventory. The head waiter is responsible for assigning tables to waiters and waitresses, but also will perform normal waiter functions as needed. He or she also needs to bill customers for their orders. The hostess is responsible for scheduling customer reservations, then has to assign the customers to specific tables, and then is also responsible for posting specials. Let's say they have a sign out front that says that our specials for the day are whatever. The head chef is going to use the current inventory to decide what those specials are. Then he or she needs to go purchase the food items and then also has to assign food prep job functions to the other chefs and assistants. The bartender is responsible for maintaining drink inventory. He or she is responsible for also ordering food for bar patrons, so he or she is going to act like a waiter or waitress as needed for the bar patrons, and then also has to ring up transactions, so he or she needs to know how much a particular order costs. What they have done for us is they've given to us a sample receipt. Now this receipt says the name of the company here, then we have the date and the time that the order was placed, who the server is, and then we have a list of the things that the person has ordered, the quantity. So here we had sushi, we had one of those at $24.99, and then a subtotal. Now the subtotal is going to be a calculated field, meaning that here where we had 2 orders of clams, we don't necessarily need to store in the database somewhere exactly how much this particular item costs. We just need to know that they ordered 2 of them and that each one was $14.99. We have 1 order of oysters at $21.99. We have 5 Pepsis at $3 a piece, so that comes out to $15. We have a subtotal, how much tax there is, the tip, and then also the total for the order, so everything added together. And then at the bottom we have a little saying that says, "Thank you for eating with us, have a nice day." Now that little saying that's at the bottom will change depending on the time of the year. So if it's Christmas time, it may say something like Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays. If it's Thanksgiving, it may say come have some turkey with us. But that saying down there at the bottom will change. Now they want to keep track of the old sayings, so that way if they ever want to reuse one of them, all they have to do is just simply select it out of the database. What we're going to do is we're going to start using this information to try to come up with a database design. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at the information that we have that they've asked for to try to figure out some things that we need. And we're going to start at a very high level, and then we're going to start normalizing the database tables from there. Alright, so first thing is looking at our list of people over here. We need information about managers. So let's make a manager table. And then we need a waiter table. And then we need a hostess table. Now this is not necessarily going to be a good design here. We'll fix this in just a minute. We need a head chef table. And then we need a bartender table. Alright, so the question is, what do these people all have in common? Well, what they have in common is that they are all employees. So we're going to make an employee table. Okay, now what happens though is we have different types of employees, so let's make an employee type table. Alright, so now what we're going to do is for each employee that we have, each employee is going to have an ID. They'll have a first name, last name, an address, city, state, zip. They'll have a telephone, probably email. other information will they have? They'll have a social security number, driver's license number, and then they'll have other things that are related to who they are as a person. All right, so then what we can do is we can also list that this person is a host or a hostess or a chef or a manager or something or another by simply making an employee type column. All right, so now just to keep this from getting confusing, I'm going to call this emp type. And like I said, it's just strictly to keep it from getting confusing, so that way we can relate these somehow. So what I can do is I'm going to put in some sample information into our table, and then we'll find out that we need some more stuff. So just to make this, I'm going to go ahead and use a table here, and we need, let's see, ID, first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, telephone, email, and then some more columns that we can't fit in there. All right, so what we want to do is we want to add some more columns. Okay, so this is going to be our ID column. This is our first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, telephone, email, driver's license number, and our emp type. And that means right now we don't need this last column, so I can go ahead and get rid of this. Okay, so now just to make this easier to see, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shrink the size of this font. So we're going to make it a lot smaller. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to put in some sample information just to see how this would actually work. So I'm going to have ID number 1 is going to be Bob Jones, who lives at 123 Main Street, and that's in Glasgow, Kentucky, 42141. Telephone number is 270-555-1212. Email is bob.jones@example.com. Social security number is 123456789. And his driver's license number is J10. Let's make up a number for him. And he's employee type number 1. Well, what does that mean? All right, so for our employee type table, we're going to have an ID. So the employee type ID, and then we'll have a description. All right, so what I want to do is I want to create a sample table just so you can see what this will look like. All right, so we're going to have these two columns. Sorry. And I will apologize, for some reason the recording software is messing with the mouse right now, so if it happens, please ignore it. Okay, so I have an ID column, and then I have a description. Okay, so let's do something like ID number 1 is the owner. ID 2 is the manager. Number 3 is assistant manager. 4 is the head chef. 5 can be, say, like a sous chef. Then 6 could be our head waiter. 7 could be just a waiter or waitress. 8 could be bus person, somebody responsible for cleaning up the tables. 9 could be our bartender. And 10 could be our host or hostess. All right, so what I've done is just simply created a sample table just to see what it'll look like with this information in it. And once again, I'm going to make it smaller just to save in room for now. All right, so what I'm doing is I'm saying that this person here is employee type number 1, which means that he is actually our owner. All right, well then I can do something like employee number 2 is Jane Doe, who lives at 234 Front Street in Glasgow. And her phone number is 270-555-2323. And she's a Jane.Doe@example.com. Her social is 234-56-7890. And her driver's license number is D we go. And she is number 2. And so forth. So what this does is it allows us to start seeing what would actually happen if we were to put data into our tables. So what I can do is I can see that, okay, well, we have fields that are valid for the employee table, and that all I did was just simply open that up because we may find that we need to add some more stuff here shortly. All right, so you look at the manager. The manager is responsible for reporting profits. Oh, hey, there we need something about sales. So we need a sales table. All right, we need to schedule shifts for employees. Schedule. Okay, then we also need to be able to order inventory. Oh, inventory, that's another thing we need to keep track of. All right, so the head waiter is responsible for assigning tables. So we're going to have a table. Now this is going to be the tables within the room that people will sit at. We're going to assign those to people. All right, so then we have the head waiter is responsible for billing customers for orders. Oh, hey, that's that sales table up here, so we can reuse this one. All right, so then we keep going from here, and we look at the hostess. The hostess is responsible for customer reservations. Okay, so we're going to have a reservation table. All right, well, we also need to think about customers because we need to know who these customers are. So we have a customer table. We're going to assign customers to tables. Hey, look, we already have those. So we don't need to remake those entities. We can just simply reuse those. Responsible for posting specials. Okay, so those are specials. Let's call specials. All right. The head chef is responsible for using the current inventory. Hey, we already have an inventory table up there. We don't need to reproduce that. Purchase food items. Okay, so now we need a purchasing table. Okay, let's see. Assign food prep job functions to other chefs and assistants. So we have employee type specifies that we have things like a sous chef and a cook and whatever else we have, but we don't have anything to say what their job functions are. So what we can do is we can make a job type or job function type table to say things like, well, your job is to make the bread, your job is to make desserts, your job is to make the pasta, your job is to be the grill cook. So it depends on what the type of job is for those. Okay, the bartender maintains a drink inventory. Hey, we already have an inventory table, so we can keep track of that. However, what we'll look at up here in this inventory table, if I look at this, we'll have an ID for each thing that we have, and then we'll have a description. We'll have a quantity in stock. Well, we want to know if it's drink or food or if it's seafood or whatever else. So what we need to do is we need to keep track of an inventory type to keep track of, is it seafood, is it drink, and so forth. Okay, so what that means is I need an inventory type table that has things like a description to state that it is a drink, or that it is food, that it's seafood, that it's a steak, that it's beef or pork or whatever else. And we can keep track of that kind of information in here. All right, so the bartender is responsible for ordering food for bar patrons. We need an order table. So we need one where we can keep track of what people order. All right, if you think about it, if you've ever seen the slips that a waiter or waitress uses, it simply has the sale ID. It has the table that's being used, the time. Let's see, what else does it have on it? It will have the customer, the seat number. They keep track of what seat it is. Let's see, then they'll have what the person ordered. So we're going to have item. How many did you want of it? And then they'll do things like special instructions. And then that's pretty much it for the order. All right, so what they're going to do is they're going to keep track of who ordered what. All right, so now it doesn't become a sale until you actually check out. So what they're going to do is take all the stuff that's in here and they're going to order it. Okay, well, where does item come from? Well, item comes from our inventory table down here. Oh, hey, look, so we have a foreign key. So I'm going to start listing out the DBDL for these. So what I'm going to say is our primary key here is ID, and we have a foreign key of item, which points to, and if you notice in Word, if you do hyphen to hyphen and then greater than, it'll turn it into an arrow. So foreign key is item, which will point to the inventory table, dot, and then the ID column. So if I have item number 3, and item 3 is a Coke, then what we're going to do is we're going to look over the inventory table for item number 3 to find out what it is. All right, so we have seat number. Oh, okay, well, seat number belongs to our table one. All right, so let's see here. We have table ID. Oh, actually, I already have table ID, so I'm going to do table ID here. And our table ID, if I put that as table number 3, then somewhere we have a listing for table number 3. So table ID points to table.id, which we don't actually have that yet, so let's go ahead and put it. Okay, so table ID column is just simply the primary key. It's the listing for all of the tables that we have. And the ID here is, let's say we have table number 3 happens to be at the west window. Okay, so we're going to have a description. So where is it? Then we also need to keep track of how many people does it seat. So we could do something like num seats, and we could do something like a Boolean. You know, does it have special accommodations? Meaning, will it seat a disabled person? Because sometimes you may have a booth and you don't have the ability to put a wheelchair at the table, or you don't have the ability to put a high chair or something like that. All right, so here our primary key is ID. Do we have any foreign keys? No, not yet. All right, so I'm going to go back up here and we're going to look at our sales. Now, when you actually place your order, the waiter or waitress is actually going back to a computer somewhere and inputting that stuff into a tracking system. And so it's responsible for keeping track of what exactly you ordered, and it doesn't actually turn it into a sale until you ask for your check. And when you ask for the check, then what it does is just simply submits all of that stuff to the ordering system, and it simply states what the order ID was. All right, so every sale is going to have an ID, and then it needs to know what the order ID is. All right, and then it'll need to know things like what the subtotal was, how much tax there was on it, was there a tip, what the total amount was, and then things like how was it paid. So I have like payment type. All right, well, what is payment type? Well, that'd be check or MasterCard or Visa or whatever. Oh, hey, that sounds like another table, so let's do a payment type table. Okay, so I'll have an ID and a description again. So now we have a primary key of ID, and description would be something like check or cash or MasterCard or Visa or whatever else. Okay, so what that means is up here for a sales table, we have a primary key of ID, we have a foreign key of payment type, which points to the payment type .id column. And we also have another foreign key here, which is order ID points to, and then that's going to point to the order.id column. So what it's doing for us is it's making it where we can start keeping track of the things without having to type in repetitive values. I don't want to keep typing check, 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 cash, check, check, cash, and so forth. I want to make it where I specify the number that corresponds to the payment type. All right, so we can keep going through and we'll see our payment type. Well, that just simply has an ID and a description. There's nothing else there. All right, so then our specials, we're going to keep track of things like what is our special for the week. So we'll do something like each one has an ID, and then we'll have whatever the special is. So we'll have a description for it. And then we'll have things like a begin date and an end date. That way we can keep track of what the specials were. Purchasing. Every purchase that we make, we're going to have an ID for it. And then we're going to have an item ID. So what item do we order? Oh, hey, look, that sounds like a foreign key. All right, so primary key is ID. Foreign key of item ID points to the item.id column. All right, so we purchased this particular item. How much was it? How many do we order? Who do we purchase it from? Oh, hey, vendor ID. Okay, so we need to know who the vendor was. So we have a vendor table, so ID, and then each vendor will have a name, an address, telephone, city, state, zip, and all that stuff too. It may have something like a website, and they may have other things also. All right, so what we're going to do is you want to finish this up, and so your job is to go through and find all the stuff that needs to be in this table, in this database. So you need to go through and come up with a list of all of these tables that need to be here. Then your next step is to normalize them. So your job is to make the tables, figure out what all stuff needs to be stored in the database, and then normalize them. All right, so if I look through these tables here, I can look at this sales ID and say, okay, ID, okay, does that determine the order ID? Yes. Does the ID determine the subtotal? Yes. Does the ID determine the tax? Yes. Does it determine the tip? Yes. Does it determine the total? Yes. Does it determine the payment type? Yes. And then if I turn around and look at these, do each of these depend on our primary key? And the answer is yes, they all do. But if I were to do something like we have an order for this table that was at this time, this seated, and they order this item, and the item has a description here. Okay, so this is not normalized because the ID does determine all of these other columns. That part's okay. But then if I look at table ID, that is determined by the ID. Time depends on the ID. Seat depends on the ID. Item depends on the ID, but item description depends on item. Now let's call this item ID just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so if I have this, if I have a transitive dependence, this is not normalized, which means that this particular column needs to be moved off to some other table. So that's why I have that under our inventory table. That's where we have the description for it. So your job is to finish this design, come up with the entire DVDL. It is to be done in Word, so that way you can do your primary keys and foreign keys and do your indents and do the errors and everything to have where they're pointed to. And then the next step is to watch the MySQL video because you're actually going to implement this in MySQL.